Ukraine's president says Russia has sent close to 100,000 troops near his country's border as concerns over an invasion continue to mount. To talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Russian officials shot down the suggestion of an invasion, instead complained about increased activity by NATO in the region?
Yeah, talk about deflection. Well, the Russians are wonderful at that, right? They're obviously instigating and pushing everything forward with the Ukrainians, but then they're denying any responsibility of all this. It's like the older instigating sibling that's kicking the little one and denying, starting anything up. But obviously, the State Department here in the United States is very concerned about this, and if they're saying something out loud about it, then there must be some smoke where there's fire, right? So we're looking at watching the Russians and what their activity has been vis-a-vis Ukraine, and they're looking at the NATO and saying, listen, if you guys aren't going to play fair by us, then we're not going to play fair, in the world global community, and that's always been the case with Russia, right? They keep different situations going so that they have some leverage when it comes to negotiating their activities. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But it's difficult to discuss foreign policy here in Washington because there's so much going on here internally. So when the State Department is noticing something's going on the Russian-Ukrainian border, then we should keep an eye on that.
Yeah, 100,000 troops, that's a lot to talk about. Now, speaking of beefing up its military, China is said to be launching its third aircraft carrier as soon as February of next year. The Center for Strategic and International Studies says construction is almost complete on the new naval vessel.
Yeah, this is a report that's coming out from a think tank that's saying, wait, this is going to be sooner than we thought. China is actively working to beef up its assets, and we need to pay attention. Now, why should it be coming from a think tank is the question. In recent weeks, we've seen several reports, one even coming out by the Pentagon, talking about how China has surpassed where we thought they would be at building up their military and their navy. Again, these reports remind us that we've been looking the other way while China has steadily been working on its agenda for world power. And when reports like this come out with them, beefing up their assets, beefing up their military, their navy, their cyber capabilities, and more, then it really deserves us to stop and not just play defense, but play offense. How can we catch up? How can we, the Western world, when I say we, really catch up to this threat, not only combat the Chinese threat, but really surpass them in all of these areas? We know what the Chinese want. It's not a secret. Now, it's deceiving for Washington or any other Western country to say we were surprised by what the Chinese did, because we've been knowing all along that this is their goal.
So how concerned do you think we should be here in North America as China continues to beef up its armed forces?
Right. If it's any indication of what China's doing in Taiwan, in the region, against Hong Kong, against its own constituents, it wants to silence them. It wants to grow its own power. It wants to shove whatever version of politics and military activity down their throats, then we know what the Chinese are up to. The question has always been, regardless of what type of government we have here in the United States, whether it's Democrat or Republican, it's always been, how do we properly combat the Chinese threat? Well, Donald Trump had one version of that, of imposing tariffs on them to say, look, economically, we've allowed you to grow and grow and grow since the 90s or more, but more so since the 90s. We've looked the other way. And now you need to pay your dues. You need to play along with the world economy if you want to have this opportunity. And they played a very different way. And they said, you don't mess with us. And they continue to do what they do. Now, we know that the tariffs worked, and obviously sanctions work, tariffs work. We know that is, economic warfare and diplomacy in the best way possible. But again, it's not a way to sit down with the Chinese people. There's no diplomacy going forward with them. There's no way to have them concede anything. There's no way to have them compromise anything. And again, looking back to their human rights abuses, to their abuses against Taiwan and Hong Kong, and their desire to have a presence in the seas. Well, we know that's exactly what they want. They want to create a hegemonic power and empire. And again, it's worth keeping an eye on. And of course, we're happy that the Pentagon and others, and even these think tanks, are working on creating more awareness about the Chinese threat.
Lisa, now that the land border to the United States is reopened, it's not just Canadian snowbirds who are celebrating, but also a record wave of Central and South Americans trying to escape violence and poverty and make new lives for themselves in your country, in the United States.
Yes, we have the second and third wave, a huge wave of migrants crossing over, coming through Mexico. But these are migrants from Honduras and Guatemala, and they've left home with a change of clothing and nothing more. There's children and women, and of course we can't vet them, and we can't look at the threats coming in. And we know that there's a drug problem with drugs coming over the border, and we know that there can be nefarious players in that. But again, this is a happy announcement for them, because they feel like there's one obstacle removed. During COVID, it was to say, and there were these conflicting reports that we would see throughout, the media, to say that 170,000 or so migrants were allowed in by the Biden administration, but then we have to show a vaccine card, passport, when we go into a local restaurant. And again, how are these migrants being tested for COVID? They are gathering in large groups and obviously have no way of keeping up with their immunity or their health, and they're coming over the border. Again, this is such a nuanced topic. We would need 30 minutes just to discuss this, you and I, Hal. But the short of it is that they feel that one obstacle has been removed, one roadblock has been removed. But again, here in the United States, many people, particularly those living on the border cities, are very concerned about the threats of those coming in. Everyone wants to start a new life in the United States, and we do believe in immigration, but in proper and legal immigration, where these individuals can be vetted across the board, from anything from terrorism to drugs to, of course, COVID. So it's a legitimate concern, right?
Prison guards in France thwarted an escape attempt from an Islamic State sympathizer, Lisa, who dug a hole in the wall of her cell and tried to escape using knotted bed sheets.
Yes, what a brave woman she was to do this. But again, we know that ISIS was very, very strategic in recruiting women, children, families of ISIS, right? They wanted to build a true caliphate, and this woman was one of them. And they found out early morning that throughout the night she was trying to dig a hole, as you said, and use her bed sheets to tying them together to create a harness of sorts to get herself out of this prison cell. Of course, she was caught. It didn't work, but an interesting story, and a tough cookie.
Yeah, A for effort and ingenuity, I guess, here. Lisa, a suspected bomb blast over the weekend on a minibus in Kabul, Afghanistan, killed a well-known journalist and injured several others. The slain journalist was identified as Hamid Saigani. Now, he apparently worked for the mainstream Ariana TV network. Tell me more.
Yeah, so, this is an interesting story. We're hearing about it because this was a very well-known and identified journalist who was killed in the blast, but these blasts are going off all the time. They were even before the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. You and I used to talk about this very often. Every week it would be, there was a blast, in Kabul at a pizza shop. There was a blast at a school. There was a blast at a wedding, at schools, mosques, etc., places where civilians go. And that's really the bottom line here, that chaos has obviously not gotten better, but it's actually gotten worse. We have the Taliban in charge. We don't know what's going on, under this guise that the Taliban is actually fighting a splinter group of ISIS, that they're having, different bombings going on in order to get rid of the enemy. But again, enemy within an enemy. It's very confusing, but the bottom line is that the people are suffering. There's still American assets there, meaning whether they're family of Americans themselves, or Afghan people who helped the Americans while we were there. I know that the French, the Brazilians, I don't know if the Canadians have people there as well on the ground that are trying to get out, but it's still awful. And I thank you for keeping this in the public spotlight. This is something we should continue to talk about. It's not over, even though the Western media wants it to be over. It's not over. And there's people there who are really in the crosshairs and are really suffering day to day.
The son of the late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi announced his candidacy for the country's presidential election next month. Lisa, isn't this the same guy who's apparently wanted by the International Criminal Court on charges of crimes against humanity in relation to an uprising back in 2011?
All right, isn't that crazy? Well, he is wanted for crimes against humanity, of course, following the footsteps of his father and continuing with those crimes against humanity, like his father did under his reign. But again, he wants to follow in his father's footsteps, so he wants to be the leader of a new Libya. Look, that country has been divided by tribalism, by terrorism, and it's really been exploited in the worst way possible. So I don't know why he would want to be the leader, how he could bring it together, but he wants more of this. Of course, as you said, he's wanted, and we know his past is really peppered with all of these different crimes against the people of Libya. So I doubt that he has any popularity there among his constituents, but we shall see. It's an interesting story to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, the U.S. Treasury Department says it's going to be partnering with Israel to combat ransomware attacks. Now, the two countries will be launching a joint task force to address some cybersecurity concerns.
Yeah, this is one of those stories you can file under. This is why we give aid to Israel, for all those naysayers who say, why do we need Israel? Why are we the parents to Israel? Why do we support them with so much aid? This is the reason. We keep going back to Israel, this small country the size of New Jersey in the Middle East, for help on things that the United States is struggling with, whether it's water irrigation or apps on our phones or medical technology in our hospitals. If you've ever had, an ultrasound, an MRI, a C-section for women who are pregnant and can't give birth the natural way, these are all Israeli inventions. And ransomware, well, we've been having issues with cyber attacks across the board here in the West, and we're going to Israel and saying, listen, you guys are cyber experts, give us a hand here. So we're teaming up with them, and that's always a good sign when we are teaming up with other nations, particularly in the Middle East. It shows a sign of progression, and it shows that a lot of other countries are also teaming up with Israel. And it just shows us this globalism that can surpass a lot of the turmoil that we've seen coming out of that area.
Now, speaking of Israel, they've reached an agreement with Pfizer to ship thousands of the pharmaceutical company's COVID-19 pills after U.S. regulators gave it the thumbs up, the green light.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about this pill. This is the Pfizer pill that will combat COVID before you need respiratory help, so that it will reduce the number of hospitalizations. So again, this is doing similarly to what the vaccine is doing, meaning it's not going to prevent you from getting COVID, but it'll prevent you from getting a serious case of COVID. And Israel has announced that they've already signed on to getting their shipments, meaning as soon as the FDA gives it its approval, Israel will be getting its first dose. As you know, Israel has been on the front lines of getting the vaccine, getting all of its population vaccinated, and now they're doing research as of this past week on an Omega variant that they believe will hit soon. The Omega variant is supposed to be the deadliest variant yet, and Israel, again, wanting to be ahead of this curve, is announcing that this is what we're looking at. Well, we're just following the research and the science here, and hopefully they're able to keep their population safe, and we can do the same here in the West. We'll see what this pill is all about.
Yeah. Lisa, when you and I talk about some of the world's biggest polluters, many times we discuss China and India. They're often mentioned. Well, authorities in Delhi, India, announced that schools are closing for a week due to smog. Apparently, Delhi is ranked as one of the world's most polluted cities.
Yeah, it's interesting that they would have to stop, going out, meaning stop going to school, stop going to work because of the smog. But Hal, if you've seen any of these pictures, you could literally scoop up this smog and put it in a jar. It's so thick. All you see is gray. And I'm glad that they at least are keeping the children safe and saying this is not this air quality is not good enough for kids to be out there. It's dangerous, particularly for children and older people who may have respiratory issues. But this looked like everyone should be staying home. It looked awful. But yes, this is, time to crack down on these nations that have this awful pollution because of what it does to the more compromised brackets of society, like children, like the elderly, like those who have issues with respiratory orders. But this is what they should talk about at these climate conferences rather than, the future of global warming. How about what we see in the present? How about what we're doing to the air quality for our constituents? And I think this is a very important story. And for people who haven't seen the photos, get out there and see it so that before it happens to somewhere like Los Angeles, where we also have a problem with smog, that we get ahead of it and we don't have an issue like that.
Well, was interesting about that climate summit in Scotland, the hundreds of planes, the jets, the personal private jets that flew in for that, you know, and all of the,
Yes,
I'm thinking to myself, if ever there was a meeting or a Zoom
exactly right.
meeting, you know, it should have been the climate conference instead of bringing all the jets in, but hey, what do I know? Our foreign affairs expert and regular contributor, Lisa Daftari, thanks a lot for joining me today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.